Good morning. My name is Jackie Anderson. I'm an assistant dean here at the University of St. Thomas, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our weekly online learning series. Today's session is Marketing During a Pandemic with St. Thomas's very own Chief Marketing Officer, Kymm Martinez. It's going to be a great session. Looking ahead, I want to remind you that our next session is on Thursday, May 21st. It's the past, present, and future of the global supply chain with Professor Kyle Goldschmidt. Kyle is actually a professor in the Operations and Supply Chain Management Department here at the University of St. Thomas, and his research has centered on the impact of supply chain disruption on managerial decisions. It'll be an intriguing session as well. I hope joining us each week has given you an hour of professional development that you might not usually have. If you're looking for more comprehensive development, please consider joining one of our executive education courses. All of our courses are now virtual for the foreseeable future. They offer comprehensive development, and ironically, this might be the perfect time to elevate your skills. But just so you know, unlike these webcasts, we actually cap participation at 25 participants to ensure you get the same personal attention that you'd get in our classrooms from our faculty, as well as getting to know your colleagues in the class. So if you haven't attended a virtual course, take a look at the website. We'd love to see you. So with that, let me tell you about our plan for the day. In a minute, I'm going to introduce Kymm Martinez, and she is going to take some time exploring the topic of marketing during a pandemic. Now, Kymm has designed a very interactive session, so please stay close to your computer and engage with us through the polls and with the chat feature. And just so you know, if you have any technical issues, we're recording this entire program, and we will send it out in 2 to 3 days. So with that, it is my pleasure to welcome today's faculty, Kymm Martinez. Kymm is actually the Chief Marketing Officer here at the University of St. Thomas. And over the last 4 years, she has really transformed our brand and our presence in the education marketplace. Prior to joining St. Thomas, Kymm spent 20 years with General Mills working in marketing and executive management roles. She has a BA in economics and an MBA from the Kellogg School at Northwestern University. I can promise you an intriguing and inspirational session. It is my delight to welcome my friend and my colleague, Kymm Martinez.
Welcome. Excited to actually be with you all this morning. I have actually spent my entire career in marketing, literally my entire career, from all the internships that I ever had in college to every job I've had since college. Marketing has been what I've been doing, and now I have an opportunity to do it in a very different sector in higher ed, which of course all of us have been hit hard with the pandemic. And so it's just been such an interesting time. In thinking and reflecting about how to lead my own organization through this and just some of the pivots that we've been making. I had written an article for LinkedIn just in the hope that it might inspire or help some other marketer out there, and it got enough traction that we thought, let's turn this into a course. So that's what we're here to do this morning. As Jackie said, very interactive, so please feel free to use the chat function. We also have a couple of polls that we're going to be using, and we're just going to explore this topic together because we're kind of, all of us really are in uncharted territory. I'm going to take you through some questions that you can use to guide your marketing efforts, as well as then get into just how to lead a marketing organization effectively. We've kind of talked a little bit about my background, so we don't need to spend a lot of time here. Just to say that the majority of my marketing, as Jackie mentioned, was from General Mills, so I'm a classically trained marketer and worked on a lot of different businesses, actually globally as well. I have specialized a little bit, I suppose you would say, in Latin America as my area. I was actually down in Mexico City when the H1N1 broke out, so we did do a little bit of marketing during that period of time, but that of course was nothing compared to the unprecedented nature of what it is that we're facing now. So to get started, I thought we might do just a quick icebreaker to get you used to the chat function and also just to see what's on your minds. If you think for a second about an organization that you believe is doing a really great job of marketing and communicating during COVID. So hopefully there's an organization that comes to mind when you think about somebody. It could be your own organization, it could be somebody that you've read about, somebody that you've seen. And using the chat function, what words words would you use to describe the marketing voice or marketing tone that you've seen in those communications? All right, I'm seeing compassion, soothing, care, honesty, authentic, enthusiasm, warmth about life, positive, upbeat, transparency. Lots of similarities here. Optimism, empathy. Great, great. I agree with a lot of those. As we go through the presentation today, see how much there's hope, teamwork. See how much of that you see actually reflected in some of the examples that I'm pulling out for you today. Guiding voice, a leader. I'm going to just give a couple more seconds for the chats to come in. Following guidelines while continuing marketing hope. Yep. Lots of great ideas, and also some great organizations you're calling out. Delta, Land of Lakes. That's great. Okay. What I would say is, and as I've looked at my own organization, there's really been a framework that we've tried to use in terms of key questions that we've been asking. First and foremost, it starts with the question of, do you have a right to be talking now? Should your product be talking and communicating now? So we're going to start with that one, but then we're also going to just talk about the importance of mission and values in terms of guiding your storytelling. How to make sure that your messages, visuals, and tone are still appropriate, how the vehicles that you're using, do those still make sense, as well as then messages that you might have been using pre-COVID, have any new messages or new benefits emerged in the post-COVID world. So we're going to just talk through these as the bulk of our section here as we dive into the marketing piece. As I've looked at television over the course of the last 6 or 7 weeks, I have seen all of these categories here advertised at one time or another. So again, I'm going to ask you to use your chat function. As you look at these categories, are there any categories that you feel should not be advertising now? And if so, why? So I'm just going to give you a second to answer that. Cruise lines, yep. Cosmetic surgery. Cosmetic surgery. Sports courts. Lots of convergence here in terms of what you guys are saying. Cosmetic surgery, cruise lines leading the group. Higher ed is a hard sell. We're going to talk about that. Yep. Insurance is questionable. It's fun as a consumer, as to be both a marketer during this time and also a consumer during this time, and to be consuming the ads, if you will, as a consumer as well as a marketer. So all right, I will just give you kind of my 2 cents on this as I thought about it in advance, and it's very interesting and very along the lines of what you guys are saying. So cosmetic surgery, I completely agree. What made me think about this was the ad that I was seeing about spider veins, and they weren't coming across, they weren't coming at it from a medical point of view, they were coming at it from an aesthetic point of view, and just wouldn't now be a great time to be thinking about getting rid of your spider veins? And it just felt very tone deaf. With all of the very real world problems that people are wrestling with right now, it just didn't feel like that was something that needed to be on television. A lot of you have already called out cruise lines, and totally agree with that. Although we're going to see in a second, there could potentially be a role for cruise lines and cruise line communications, but not in the old way, not in the pre-COVID, just go on as if life is the same way. So I completely agree with that. And the one that I didn't necessarily see in here, but you might be surprised with, is the hand sanitizers and cleansers. And the reason for that is, while absolutely that's a very relevant product right now, you can't find that. So advertising for something that you actually have a really hard time finding in stores, especially with a message that we already know that we should be disinfecting, that also doesn't seem to feel like a good spend of money right now. Now, some of you brought up higher ed, and I think that's fair. And so that kind of leads to my next question. If you're not sure whether your product right now is relevant or whether you should be communicating right now, one of the things that you can do is just look at your web traffic to see, are consumers wanting to engage with my category right now? And so for St. Thomas, when we looked at our web traffic, what you see here is a view of a 12-month period of time with requests for information as well as people then just wanting to visit campus. And you can see that we have some lows like Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day. People aren't necessarily thinking about higher ed on those days. And at the very beginning of COVID, we did see a dip there similar to what we would have seen on Christmas or Thanksgiving, but it very quickly bounced back. You still have high school seniors that are graduating that are thinking about what they're going to be doing for college. And in fact, with a lot of the virtual visits and the things that we've had, the level of engagement has been extremely high. So that tells us that people do want to be hearing from us. And then of course, we've got undergrad and graduate. So thinking about reskilling as people look to their futures, their careers, there is definitely a lot of interest in this. And so that is why we've made the decision, yep, now is the time we want to be communicating with our folks. Now, as a lot of other companies have made the decision to go ahead and move forward and communicate too, there's been a lot of press about this notion of the sea of sameness. And there's actually a really great ad. I'm just sorry, I'm going to answer a chat question. RFI is requests for information. So that's people who want more information about your product or service. There's a great mashup ad right now that's on YouTube, and I've got a link to it later on in the presentation where somebody took screen grabs of a lot of the different COVID ads and just strung them together, and they make one big long 3-minute ad that actually kind of hangs together because a lot of people are using the same messages. And and these are actually screen grabs from that mashup, so it starts off with the somber music and it shows like the empty streets and it says, at times like this, now more than ever, our brand has been there for you. So there's been a lot of genericness. And so there's a question of, is it good or bad to actually be talking like that? And the answer is it really depends on your brand and what you have to say, and we're going to talk about that in just a sec. One of the first things that we saw brands do after COVID broke out was come forward, some of them at least, with social distancing logos. And some of these were better received than others. I would say the McDonald's one actually got a lot of backlash. And the reason for that is actually because there are some who feel that McDonald's isn't necessarily today paying a livable wage to its employees or caring much for its employees. Now, I have a brother who's the vice president at McDonald's who vehemently disagrees with that. So there are obviously two sides to every coin. But because that was the perception, it felt like McDonald's didn't have the right to put themselves into this "we care about you" conversation, when to some people at least it didn't feel like they cared about their employees. So McDonald's did face a fair amount of backlash in that. I actually had a colleague that looked at the Audi social distancing ad and thought it was for the Olympics. So there actually could be a little bit of confusion there, but this was kind of the first foray, and there was some backlash to that. This is a quote from an executive creative director, who's talking about the fact that, this global situation is not a joke. It's very serious, and, our brands who design social distancing logos, does that have the potential to diminish the severity of what we're going through? And I think that's a very genuine and real question. The editor-in-chief of Ad Age also said, that now is the time for brands to be thinking about real, meaningful service. And, shutting up and doing something helpful is what we want to see brands doing, and specifically calling out McDonald's or Coke. And it's possible that they saw this because Coke, if you go actually to their website now, they do have a note that they have decided that they're going to go off the air right now because they don't feel that now is the time for their regular Coke messaging. And even more importantly than that, they're actually feeling like they would take the money that they would have spent on advertising and they're looking at, can they better deploy it to something that actually makes more sense for the COVID response. So Coke also has turned over some of their social media accounts to nonprofits that are actually really stepping forward and helping in this outbreak. outbreak, so Salvation Army, Red Cross, and they're doing that because they have so many more followers than the social accounts of those organizations, and so they're trying to figure out how they can use their scope and scale to help others reach audiences that they need to. So this is an example from them. How should you think through this? A framework that I like is from Leo Burnett, which is an advertising agency, and they have come up with this assessment framework where they plot relevance and authenticity on the two quadrants. So relevance here is about just making sure that brands are acknowledging, what's on people's minds, but then the solution that they're offering, should be something that people can use today, as well as then authenticity. Is the brand, and some of you have said this already in the chat, does the brand is their purpose aligned with something that would relate to a COVID response, and are they being seen as genuine as opposed to opportunistic or gratuitous? So this is a quadrant grid. So if we start with the high relevance, low authenticity, communications or ads that find itself in this quadrant would likely feel disconnected. And the reason is that the brand does have a role to play, but it fails to say what people want to hear from them at this time. If we go to the left, opportunistic is the next quadrant. So the brand is attempting to take advantage of the crisis instead of engaging with it in an authentic way. And this would obviously not be a place any of us would want to be. The next is invisible. So the brand creates a message that does match its purpose, but the message isn't really relevant, and it's not able to reach a broad impact. So it's relatively invisible to what's happening right now. And then the fourth quadrant is the sweet spot. So this is actually where we'd all love to be, any of us who choose to advertise or communicate during this time. You want a brand that shares a message that is true to the core purpose, but yet is also something that is really relevant to the crisis as it stands today. We're going to use this framework as we go into a couple of polling questions. So you might want to take a picture of your screen if you, or jot down some notes in terms of what these four buckets represent, because I'm going to be asking for your opinion a little later on some ads and communications, and ask you where you think they fall on this grid. But first, I'm going to give you some examples. I'm going to give you an example from each of these quadrants. And let me say that advertising, as you well know, is subjective. So this is my point of view on which ads would fit in. I think we could probably have a dialogue about whether these are the right categorizations for all of these ads, and that would be appropriate and valuable. But just know, this is just my 2 cents on where some of these ads fit. We're going to start with cruise lines. So I know a lot of you mentioned when we were talking about who doesn't have a right to be talking right now, and cruise lines actually came up. And while I do agree with that, I actually do think there could potentially be an exception. But this particular ad that I'm about to show is an example of a disconnected ad, and I think a lot of you would agree, given that you already mentioned that. So let's watch the Norwegian ad.
No pictures. No posting. This is just for us.
I wanna feel just a little, just a little, just a little. Wanna feel just a little, little bit more. Little bit more.
Norwegian Cruise Line. Feel free.
So what was particularly hard for Norwegian Cruise Lines when this ad was on air is this literally aired during a pod, during a newscast where they were talking about the Norwegian Cruise Line that was the actual ship that was floating and was having a really hard time finding a place to come into port because there were too many passengers on board that had actually been diagnosed with corona. So that ad obviously completely missed the mark. It's completely disconnected. But the reason why, there could potentially still have been a role for cruise lines to play, potentially. What people want to hear from them is, what are you doing to keep people safe? And perhaps now is not the time for that, because of course the CDC came out and said avoid cruises like altogether. But at some point, people are going to know what precautions and what steps are people taking. There will be a role at some point for cruise lines to take, but pretending or not pretending, I think this was just the COVID came on so strong, and so for some, I think people just didn't react quickly enough to it. This ad didn't get pulled down quickly enough, and so as a result of that, it made Norwegian look very disconnected with what was happening in life today. We move to the next ad. Whoops, there we go. Oop. Let's see. The next ad, actually, and we didn't, was Amazon. So, and we're going to talk about opportunistic, and I'm going to use Amazon as my example here. And again, some of you may disagree with this, but I will tell you why I think this ad is on the opportunistic side when we get to the other side of it.
Right now, delivering the things people need has never been more important. To all of our Amazon retail heroes on the floor, in the air, and behind the wheel, we want to thank you. We'll continue to do everything we can to keep you healthy, safe, and protected. The work you are doing means everything right now. Thank you.
Right. The reason why I think that is opportunistic is because while for sure it's thanking all of the Amazon workers, and while that could be considered a good thing, there's been a lot of press, and I don't know the truth, I don't work for Amazon, just about that culture, and actually some folks have even said it's a toxic culture. There was a very high profile resignation, I think just last week, of one of their VPs of supply chain or engineering, where they said they don't think the company is serious about protecting employees. And so for that reason, it falls a little bit into the bucket of what we were talking about before with McDonald's, where it feels like they're trying to jump in and say, but there could be a little bit of inauthenticity depending on how people feel about how they're actually protecting their employees. And again, I don't know the truth to that, but that would be the reason why it would fall into the opportunistic bucket because of that. Moving on then to invisible. The invisible ad that I am going to call out here is McDonald's. And I'll tell you why after we get to the other side where you have a chance to see it.
For all those going out each day, doing what they can to hold us all together, we're here to help those helping us all by keeping our lights on.
So for this one, the message of keeping their lights on just felt like, really, is that what you would want to tell people right now, that you've got your lights on? Maybe, but that was the reason of like all the things that McDonald's potentially could have chosen to talk about. It just didn't feel like the invisible piece was just sort of a benefit that maybe people weren't as interested in hearing, or that would not sink in. So that was why I had chosen this one as invisible. It just felt like there potentially were, and I know and I'm cherry picking here, right? Because, a big company like McDonald's has a ton of ads, so probably there are other ads out there that do address other things, and I'm picking on this particular one. But as you think about that, just the notion that it's keeping the lights on, it just didn't feel like that was the most relevant thing that they could be saying right now. And last but not least is the sweet spot. So this is the place that obviously everybody would love to be. The product and brand that I'm pulling out here is Microsoft Teams. So let's go ahead and watch that spot.
We are running our COVID-19 technology response on Teams.
Teams has given us the possibility to continue to innovate, to continue business and to react and to decide action.
Bringing up video visits and accomplishing 14,000 visits in a matter of a few weeks.
L'Oréal since Thursday has decided to convert its facilities to produce hand sanitizer.
I can bring them in. I can actually share my screen and show the x-rays.
Completely agree. This is going to be a game changer for medicine.
The university is not only teaching, is research, is building up projects, is creating culture.
We care about keeping London safe, keeping the police service going. We're living on Teams. It's as simple as that.
So it seems great about that, and I see somebody just said it in the chat too, authentic testimonials, that this is actually, it's a product that people are using now, and I love how they're showing that they're using it in real life situations that really, really matter, and so it feels like a really authentic place for this brand to be. I'm just going to backtrack for just a second to the McDonald's ad, because there are a couple of interesting comments here in the chat in terms of like the McDonald's ad and why it might have been on point or off point. There was a comment that, you know, there's also a lot of small restaurants that aren't allowed to keep their lights on. And I thought that was a very good point, because yeah, it's like the juxtaposition of the big companies that are perhaps, at least the perception is, getting some advantages over some of the smaller businesses. So that's another reason. But then there was also another point in the chat about, but if their point and who they were trying to talk to was truck drivers, and you wanted to let truck drivers know that actually as you're going along your routes, you could still find McDonald's open, potentially that might be a reason why that ad might be relevant. So good discussion there, and also a good example of, depending on your audience and depending on your perspective, you know, how your view of whether an ad's doing its job or not can change. So thanks for the comments, and please keep them coming. Although I notice that every time I interact with the comments, that's what I think happens. That's when my screen shuts down. So I will not be doing that. Okay, moving forward then. This ad I think is just going to play, so we're going to let it play. Okay, I'm sure many of you have seen that or seen some variation of that. And so now I would like to open it up. We're going to do a poll. This is where you're going to have to remember those quadrants. And I'm interested in your opinion about whether this is disconnected, opportunistic, invisible, or the sweet spot. We're going to put a poll up so that you actually have an opportunity to vote in the poll. So if we can do that.
Sounds good. I'm still waiting for them. There you go. Sweet spot, 72%. Invisible, 12%. Opportunistic, 13%. Disconnected, 3%.
Okay, so the vast majority of you thought that it was in the sweet spot. I would agree with that. I feel like Nike has, as its brand, it's all about just do it. It's all about athletes. It's all about performing. And so they have a wonderful way here of showing just a different way of performing. For those of you that didn't agree with the sweet spot, though, feel free to put in the chat why you didn't agree with that. Because again, it's all subjective. There could be reasons why. And perhaps somebody who said invisible is just because, you know, there's so many similar looking, sounding ads. Maybe the breakthrough wasn't quite there for folks. But yeah, I would agree that Nike, oh, now I see the screen. Okay, good. Now that Nike actually did a really nice job, you know, kind of like with this one. well-respected sports players getting ready at home. Yep, that was the thing. That probably they were counting on for a little bit of the breakthrough, people recognizing that these were celebrities, at least some of them were, and then counting on that. And it was in some respects a little nice that they didn't just announce the celebrity, that they just had it be an organic part of the spot, perhaps looking like it was a little less opportunistic in that way. Okay, we're going to go then on to the next one. Oops. All right, so this is Burger King. So this isn't a TV ad. This is actually more, I guess you would call it out-of-home advertising. What's going on here? So you have, obviously Home of the Whopper is what they're known for. And so some of the storefronts actually put stay home and then had the line Xing out of the Whopper. And then I'm guessing this was in France. They actually had some storefront signage that just basically showed people how to make a Whopper. So if you couldn't come in for a Whopper, here's how to make a Whopper at home. So curious to know from your perspective, if we could put the poll back up again, disconnected, opportunistic, invisible, or the sweet spot on this one. Okay, and Jackie, now I see it. So we're still getting a couple of votes coming in. This one is a little more split, because I can see real time what you guys are saying. So, okay, do we want to go ahead and share the poll? Okay, so you said invisible as your number one, but quickly followed by the sweet spot and also some opportunistic in there. I would agree that this was invisible. That was kind of more what I was thinking about, and more invisible just because the scale of it. Possibly people who were driving by that Burger King might see it. I don't know whether there was an opportunity through social to try and amplify this into something bigger. The challenge, though, when you do like and I'm going to call it a little bit of a stunt like this, and then you try and amplify it on social and make a big deal out of it and try and draw a lot of attention to it, you could push yourself into that opportunistic bucket. So perhaps that's one of the reasons why they might not have done that. But by not doing that, you're not amplifying it, and you do stay a little bit invisible. Although, in my mind, it is clever. It's definitely clever. So if you noticed it, I could see that you would possibly talk about it, but it would just be how would you get more traction on that. I thought that the signage of like showing how to make a Whopper is maybe not, it's not that hard to make a Whopper. So maybe, that in and of itself isn't that difficult, but possibly it's a nod to some of the other companies that are turning over their tech secrets, 3M showing others how to make the N95 masks, that kind of thing. So maybe it was Burger King's way of showing people that they're willing to help people do things at home that they might otherwise have needed to come into a Burger King for. But maybe that's also a stretch and a reach. Who knows? Okay, let's go on to the next one. So for those of you, I don't know why I'm having trouble with my going in the right direction here. Hold on. Here we go. So for those of you that are from Minnesota, or even if you're not from Minnesota, because this brand is growing, you might be familiar with Love Your Melon. I love Your Melon because it was started in a St. Thomas classroom by two St. Thomas students who were in an entrepreneurship class, and they were doing a lemonade stand, and it grew into this really amazing business. But so for those of you that might not be familiar with Love Your Melon, they give away hats. They call them beanies, and they give you buy one, and then they give a hat to pediatric cancer kids who have either cancer or a donation to helping to solve pediatric cancer. So it's a very philanthropically founded company, and they have a new face mask line that they just launched, which you can see is sold out in a lot of places. So my question for you is this notion of Love Your Melon venturing into face masks disconnected, opportunistic, invisible, or the sweet spot? So if we can put the poll up. Interesting. You tend to be toggling back and forth between two responses, opportunistic and the sweet spot. Okay, I think we can probably close the poll. Okay, opportunistic, many of you said. Some of you said the sweet spot. I think this is an interesting case because actually, if you dig into the backstory on the face masks here, they actually, the first 100,000 face masks that they produced actually went to frontline health workers, and they actually shipped them all over the 50 states. And now, if you buy a face mask, they still do donate a face mask to somebody in need, either a high-risk individual or a healthcare practitioner. So I think once you know that, if you knew that, it might fall a little bit more into that sweet spot category than opportunistic. But if you didn't know that, it might go a little more into that opportunistic area. And this would be my my opportunity that I would suggest to Love Your Melon on their site. This is literally a screen grab from their site. You have to go into their blog to find out that they're doing all of this with face masks and it's buy one, give one. There is nothing here that tells you that they're continuing to maintain that philanthropic look. And so I'm seeing somebody in the chat saying, you didn't give us that information. Nope, I didn't, because this is literally what the website says. So if you're a consumer and you go to the website, this is what you're going to see. So the fact that you have to dig for that possibly is an opportunity for them to let people know that, so that they actually don't look so opportunistic. Okay, and I think I have one more for you. So this one actually is Zappos. So I don't know how many of you, so Zappos actually is known for its customer service, and they decided to take their team of customer service reps and say, you know what, you can call us for anything. So they renamed it and rebranded it Customer Service for Anything, said you don't have to make a purchase, you can call, and then they give examples. You can call if you want to discuss the latest Netflix show, or if you can't find flour in your local market and you want to know what grocery store might carry it, or which restaurants are open. They're encouraging you to call the Zappos line and talk to one of their customer service reps, no purchase necessary. So question for you on that one: disconnected, opportunistic, invisible, or the sweet spot? Let's see what you vote. Okay, let's close the poll. Okay, so a lot of you said sweet spot. Some of you said disconnected as the next one. I have to say that when I first saw this, and I'm not a huge Zappos shopper, so I mean, I know that they're known for customer service, but that isn't really something that I carry kind of like deep within my heart. I did worry that this felt a little disconnected. I was like, wow, will people do anything to try and jump into the COVID conversation on this? But that really is the core purpose of their company. Is they're like they like to say they're a shoe company, or that they're a customer service company that happens to sell shoes. So if you think about their purpose from that point of view, it is a really interesting spin to think about how might they deploy those customer service folks in a way that's different. There's a lot of people who are isolated right now, quarantining on their own, who might be starved for human contact, and so this might actually be a way for them to do that. I also did know from reading just some articles on this, there was actually a doctor at Mount Sinai that needed I think they're called, well, I'm going to butcher the medical name of it, so I'm just going to describe it. The things that you put on your fingertips that actually measure the pulse, they were in, I think they're called oximeters or something. They were in short supply, and he needed about 1,000 of them. And so he decided to, hey, why not? He called the Zappos line and said, this is what I need. The Zappos team went to work using their supply chain, using their contacts, and they were actually able to find 300 for them. So not the full 1,000, but they did find 300 and they shipped them to them. So, you know, in that respect, they are playing a role. You could say sweet spot. I think you have to understand a little bit more about the core of Zappos to make sure that you're not kind of like in the disconnected realm. But as somebody is pointing out in the chat, you know, obviously the brands aren't experts on every topic. So, but they're trying to do something more than just sell shoes, I think is the point that they're trying to make. So, okay. Moving on then, I think that what all of this illustrates is the importance of making sure that mission is at the center of absolutely everything that you do. I do have a couple of examples here from St. Thomas just because that's where I'm from, so I can show you that this is what we've done. In no way is this intended to be a St. Thomas commercial for you, but it's just to show some of the things that we've done. So obviously on our website, we immediately acknowledged what was happening, made it really easy to find the COVID-19, what our response plan was. I'm actually amazed at how many websites you go on that doesn't have any COVID-19 response, you know, which seems to be the first thing that you would do to respond. But you know, for us, when you click on that, we have our COVID page. For us, it's really important with our mission to make sure that we're calling out there should be no discrimination on the basis of ethnicity or race in terms of, you know, this illness. And so we make sure to call that right out. We want to make sure people know we have a way to help our students. So many of our students, faculty, staff, a lot of people are suffering as are all across the world. So we've got hardship funds, as I'm sure a lot of other people do too, making sure people know how to do that. And then we are calling out what it is, all of the different things that St. Thomas is doing. So in that St. Thomas response, if you go to that, we actually have a curated page in our newsroom that is just the keeper of all of the different stories, of all of the different responses, whether they're from alums or faculty or students. I think we have to be really careful about this because, you know, again, we don't want to look like we're trying to market this too much. This is just the authentic stories that we've been writing, so we have them, you know, kind of here on our website. We have made the decision that our summer magazine, our alumni magazine that we normally send out, we are going to have it really focused on COVID-19 and the response to COVID-19 and the stories from that. We thought long and hard about that because on the one hand, we don't, again, want to look like we're marketing this or trying to you know, trying to opportunistically take this and make it seem like, you know, St. Thomas is, I don't know, again, just trying to benefit, you know, kind of like from this. But at the same time, this is a very unique moment in time. And there are a lot of people that are very interested in knowing, if I send my child there, is what are you going to do to keep them safe? There's a lot of alums that have wondered, what are you doing? So we are moving forward with a COVID focused magazine, but we did think a lot about it. And again, just want to make sure that it's not about marketing St. Thomas. It's just about telling the story of our response. Moving now into just different pieces of creative. And we've talked a little bit about this when we went through the framework, but you know, I think at the very beginning of this, everybody hopefully asks themselves the question of, is there anything that I have on air or out in the digital space or anywhere that would be inappropriate now using the eyes of COVID? And so for those of you that might be familiar with the Hershey's ad, this is a true story of an older guy, I think he's like 92, who literally goes and buys Hershey's bars and passes them out in his hometown, and he gives hugs when he does it. It's a very heartwarming ad, but hugs right now, that doesn't feel right. So Hershey's did pull that ad in the beginning, and I think that was the right thing for them to do. Axe also actually was planning an ad for March Madness, and it was an ad that actually was going to show us a guy sitting in the crowded bleachers of a basketball game who holds up his hands to cheer, and he hasn't used Axe, and so it clears out the stands. And so that's a screen grab from the clears out the stands part. Obviously, March Madness didn't happen, but also there's nobody in our basketball stadiums right now, and it's not because people didn't wear the right deodorant. So I think they did the absolute right thing by pulling that ad, just because, again, it would have looked very disconnected and tone deaf if they hadn't done that. For our sake, at St. Thomas, the things that we actually pivoted to were more minor compared to that, but I think still worth thinking about. You know, for us, we had some engineering spots that were actually featuring some playful Italian images. This one was the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And, you know, just in light of all of the tragedy and everything that's happening in Italy right now, it didn't feel like there's anything playful about what's happening in Italy. We pulled anything that had an Italian reference. And then we also had some ads that showed different hands touching. And again, just in this era of social distancing, we pulled those as well. One of the other things that we had to do, and I don't know how many of you have multiple social media accounts in your organizations, but we have a lot of social media accounts at St. Thomas. We have our institutional accounts, of course, but then we have a lot of different, all the different schools, colleges, lots of different accounts coming. And we wanted to provide guidance for our social media managers so that they, again, so that we hopefully didn't look tone deaf during this time. So the guidance that we provided is, think about your content in 3 different buckets. Think about it as making sure that people have the news that they need, if there's practical information that they need, or if there's anything that you can do to kind of support well-being. Again, we had a lot of conversations about humor, and there are people who want to break from COVID and who would really like to be able to think about something that isn't COVID. And so is humor appropriate, kind of like during this time? And I think there's a very fine line that you have to walk on that. And Ellen DeGeneres, unfortunately, I think did not walk the finest side of that line when on her show she was making a joke and she was saying, one thing that I've learned from being in quarantine is that it's like being in jail. It's mostly because I've been wearing the same clothes for 10 days and everyone in here is gay, which was an attempt at humor. Twitter quickly responded, and these are just some of the responses that she got back. What a great look for Ellen as thousands of people sit in actual jail cells just hoping for the best without soap and basic protections. Or, Ellen, you quarantining in your mansion in designer sweats is nothing like prison. So all of I think very fair. That's the problem with humor. There are a lot of folks, there are people that do want a little moment of respite in this, but it's hard to know when that moment is. And also ask yourself, are you the right one to provide it? Or are there other places that people can go to get that moment? As you think about advertising vehicles, and I'm sure, again, this is not rocket science, so a lot of you probably have already kind of like thought through that. We were about ready to launch a new outdoor marketing campaign on the side of buses in downtown Minneapolis, which we said, you know what, now is probably not the time for that. Although I have to say I'm getting a lot of spam from outdoor advertising companies who are trying to tell me that pedestrian traffic in downtown Minneapolis is back to pre-COVID levels, which I'm not believing. But just think about where it is that you're going, and where your advertising is being placed. We did have some ads that were performing digitally really well before COVID, and then just sort of fell off a cliff in terms of response, and so we actually stopped those. We also were planning some March Madness presence that we had to redeploy, and just a lot of things with digital, which I'm sure a lot of you have done as well, like digital, like how to make sure that you're pushing and promoting anything that you've moved online. So for us, we have a lot of virtual visits. Obviously, our product that we're selling is very physical, and it works best when you actually come and you actually see it. But we've actually got a lot of options online with digital virtual tours, as well as digital visits that you can have with our admissions counselors. And so we launched a paid campaign to promote that. We also had a TV campaign running at the time, so we added a little bug in the corner of the TV campaign, just making sure that people were aware of our virtual visits. And then something that we have previously considered as a bit of a something, not an Achilles heel, but something we would like to reframe for St. Thomas is just the local presence. That we have a very high percentage of our students that come from Minnesota, and we've been wanting to expand and go outside of Minnesota, but perhaps now is a moment where people might want to stay closer to home. So we actually we videoed, this is one of our students who's from Bloomington, Minnesota, and just talking about the advantages of going to school and yet being still close to home. So that would be a message that we would probably not have thought much about before COVID, but is a message that we're talking about now. And so on that topic of different messages and different, right now there are different problems that consumers are facing that they wouldn't have faced before. And there are opportunities, I think, for different messages. And so as you think about your organization, think about what are all the different things the opportunities that actually have come out of this, and are we doing enough to talk about all these different opportunities? I just pulled a little bit of a sampling, kind of like here. I think I continue to scratch my head at the whole Tiger King phenomenon, even though I myself have seen all 7 episodes plus the bonus 8th episode. It's just a different time, and consumers' behavior is changing, and they're looking for different things. And if you can stay on top of what it is that they're looking for, and you can come in with a need, there's a real opportunity. In the 5 minutes that I have left, I'm going to just briefly talk about leading a marketing team, and just kind of like hit the highlights here. I think for those of you that are leading, it's so important even during this particular time to be visible. I know that we've actually really upped the frequency of our department meetings. We used to have quarterly meetings, and we're now having weekly meetings, weekly hour-long Zoom meetings, just to make sure that people are still feeling connected, kind of in this time. I think it's really important now to make sure that leaders are being authentic and vulnerable. I'm a huge believer in showing your vulnerability, and I think that makes you stronger as a leader. Brene Brown has done some terrific work in that area as a researcher. I have a TED Talk that I'm going to show you on a link in a second about the power of vulnerability in the other resource section, where it just really showcases and talks about that. And now is a time when we as leaders are going through the same thing that the rest of the world is going through. We have our own doubts, fears, and anxieties about what will happen too. And I just believe showing that authenticity and that vulnerability and being transparent with that helps people. Actually, Patrick Lencioni wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And one of the ways he said that you can see whether or not a team trusts each other is whether or not they're willing to be vulnerable with each other. It's the litmus test to see whether or not there's trust. And so now I think is a time to continue to show that. As you think about the future, and a lot of people are thinking about, sort of getting on the other side of COVID, and what do you hope the future can bring? I think there's a really interesting question to be asked too about what were you doing in the past that you don't want to be doing in the future? So are there some things that you don't want to be rebuilding, and things that you were doing before? Or are there things that you've really wanted to do but you haven't been able to do? I think it's not only for our internal organizations, but I think it's also really interesting to think about consumers in this lens. Are there things that consumers have now learned to do that they can do now that they wouldn't have been able to do pre-COVID? For us, I actually think this notion of virtual Tommy days, kind of to think about, us having our admissions events. A lot of times our admissions events are on campus, but as I said, we're looking to try and expand our message outside of Minnesota. Is there an opportunity to do student panels virtually, talk with administrators virtually, things that before COVID, there might not have been the ability or even the interest in doing, but maybe that's something that we'll be able to take advantage of after. So things like that, are there things that we wanted to do, but then now this opportunity to introduce a new behavior is allowing us to do something that we wouldn't have been able to do. Because at the end of the day, I really believe on the creativity front that when your ambition is high, but your resources are low, that is where creativity happens. When your ambition and your resources are matched, it's often hard to find creativity there. So this is a moment where I think we really can push ourselves and our teams to find more creativity, in this situation. And there is a phenomenal TED Talk, if you haven't seen it. This is an artist, his name is Phil Hansen, and he specialized in a kind of art that they call the pointillist style. So it's about putting very small dots on paper, and then when you step back from all those small dots, it forms an image. And over time, and possibly because of his pointillist, or maybe it would have happened anyway, he got a neurological issue with his hand, and his hand started to shake, and he was no longer able to do the kind of art that he was known for. And so he did a TED Talk on it. What I love about it, it's also only 10 minutes. It's called Embrace the Shake, and it's about what happens when you bump into a constraint. So for him, this constraint was this shake in his hand, and he talks about how it unleashed a creativity that he'd never had before because of that. And so this is something potentially to inspire you or to inspire some of your teams, how to take this time and the constraints that we're up against and use it to unleash creativity to arrive at solutions or opportunities that we wouldn't have been able to get to before. So with that, Jackie, I think we're out of time. So
wow,
hopefully there's
Kymm,
Q&A within.
that was fabulous. Always engaging, always forward thinking. Can't thank you enough for joining us today. We've had a lot of great questions on the chat. Sorry we can't get to them all today. But I do hope we see you next week on Thursday, May 21st, with Professor Kyle Goldschmidt talking about the past, present, future of the supply chain. I want to thank Kymm for joining us today, and I want to thank you all, and have a great Wednesday.